Well, last week we talked about an imaginary scene where we're driving down a road, a desolate highway, only to discover that there's a car parked there in the shoulder. And we assume that the driver needs some assistance, so we stop to help. We get out of our car and we walk over there and we look in the window and realize that the car is empty, except for a journal that's lying on the front seat. So we open up the door and we picked up that journal and we read of a man who had set out on a journey to try to make sense of life. And he's made periodic entries in this journal, and we're curious, and so we start to read along, and so we continue. Even today, as we get to day 5 in his journal, and he writes this: "The lights turned out to be a city. I could see the glow long before I reached it, a pulsing energy that promised life, excitement, maybe even meaning. And I wasn't the only one headed there. Cars poured in from every direction, headlights merging into one stream of anticipation. For the first time in days, I felt like I was part of something again. Downtown was alive, music, laughter, neon, people rushing from one thing to the next, shopping, eating, celebrating, and performing. The kind of place where everything screams, 'This is it. This is living.' So I joined the conga line." This morning, we resume our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's a book that was written by Solomon. It was written by by a man who was considered the wisest of the wise. And it's a book about the meaning of life. And it's also a book that typically leaves us scratching our heads. It reads like a journal, even though I think it should be more considered a memoir, because he's actually looking back over life, but he shares it with us kind of a chunk at a time chronologically. But by the time he writes this, he's an older man, almost to the end of his life. And it's like he gets some newfound perspective, kind of as he comes to the end of this journey. But in his memory, he goes through 2 questions that we all wrestle with. The first one is this: what is the meaning of life? And the second one is this: how can a person find fulfillment in life? Or we could say it this way: what is life all about? Or is this all there is? Or does this matter, any of it? I came across a song that was online written by a guy by the name, I have no idea who he is, Mark Skibilia. And he was posting this, I think, on Facebook maybe. And he was saying, "Hey, thanks, I've gotten 16 million views of my song online here this week." 16 million, keep that in mind. Here are the words from this song: "I've been thinking about dying and how that's going to be when my skin and bones give up the ghost and I finally feel my fragile soul and all I am falls into mystery. I've been thinking about the after and all the folks I want to see. My neighbor says that's all there is. My daughter says we live again. Most of the time, I'm somewhere in between. Don't the question beg an answer? Don't the song beg a dancer? Don't you dare tell me that there ain't no more to this. That there ain't no more to this." 16 million views last week. Seems like Solomon's not alone. And he asks these questions that we still have for today. And so when we get to this book, we realize that Solomon has come to some conclusions, but he kind of teases us. He doesn't share them until we're to the very end, but all along the way, he just kind of gives us some hints. But in the meantime, we get to travel with Solomon as he goes down this road of life, and he struggles with it because it feels meaningless and it feels futile, or what we might call empty miles. We talked last week about chapter 1, which was kind of the introduction to this whole idea. And to be honest, it's kind of a negative chapter if you read that, and a little bit depressing. He summed it all up in verse number 8, right in the middle of that chapter, and he said this: "It's all just tiresome. Like I get up every day and I just do the same thing that I did yesterday. And if anything changes, it's only a problem that we add to the mix. And I get to the end and I'm just worn out, and I'm like, if I can just make it to bed, and then I get up and I have to do it all over again." You talk about crazy cycles, right? And that's what life is. It's a crazy cycle. But we said that in the compost of all of this negativity, we could find seeds of hope. In the idea that life really is about something, and that it might be something we can figure out, and that life really is worth living, and that we really can live life better. So we get to chapter 2 now in his memoir, his journal, whatever you like. If you want to use the Bible, it's in front of you. It's on page 472, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, or you can use your phone, your tablet, whatever you've got. And he moves on from his initial conclusions, and he starts to explain how he came to those conclusions. Now, last week, keep this in mind as we introduce this series, we said that Solomon, in his journey, travels down three main roads, or three main lanes, really. We said he traveled down the lane of self, he traveled down the lane of the horizontal, and he traveled down the lane of experiences. And we're going to see that in this chapter. I mean, he's hitting them all. It's like he's skidding sideways down the road here. But it's all the same road. Let's see where it takes him. Verse number 1 of chapter 2, Solomon says this, I said to myself. If we see this back in chapter 1, verse number 16, we had seen this phrase before, I said to myself. And let's just look at it up here. This is what he says in verse 16 of chapter 1. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much wisdom and knowledge. And so he says this phrase here, I said to myself. And basically what we see here is Solomon is saying, hey, I am the smartest guy in the room. And he was. I should be able to figure this out. I have access to every resource that I might need in order to figure this out. If it takes money, I've got money. If it takes connections, I've got connections. If it takes brains, man, I've got some brains. I've got it all going on here. And so he says it again here in verse number 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. He doesn't need to ask anybody else in his mind. Like, he could have asked his father, David, who was, a great man. He could have asked, like, maybe a mentor, or maybe he could have asked even some friends who could have, helped point him in the right direction. No, he's going to go solo on this because he's convinced of his own wisdom. And let me just say this. Wisdom without counsel is always going to be faulty and flawed. And sometimes, like, I got this figured out. I can handle this. I don't really need to ask anybody because I'm a pretty smart guy. Or I've at least been through this. I know what to expect or whatever. We have these things that we think, and we don't ask anybody else, and we get ourselves into trouble. And that's exactly what Solomon does here. But what he says here in verse number 1 is he says, I am going to test this, or I'm going to try this out. He's looking for the good life. In his first test involves pleasure. And when I say pleasure, we're talking about just happiness. He's looking for the things that are going to bring him happiness in life. And so this is one of the major roads that he takes in this book, or as he lays out in this journal here. He's like, I'm going to try this road of happiness. In other places, he tries wisdom, or he tries knowledge, or work, or advancement, or other things. But here, he's really on this idea of what's going to make him happy. And that connects with us because really that ultimately is the question that all of us are asking. How can I be happy? I mean, and we make decisions based on what's going to make us happy. Like if you got up this morning and you had breakfast, you probably didn't look in the cupboard and say, what's the worst tasting thing I've got in here? Let's just eat that and get it out of the way. We didn't do that. We're like, what's going to taste good here this morning? What am I going to like? What am I going to enjoy? And I mean, when you got dressed this morning, you put on clothes that at some level made you happy. You're like, I think I look good. I think I feel pretty good in this. I'm going to put this on. Happiness drives a lot of things. And what Solomon is saying is, I'm going to find all the things in life that make me happy. But it's an interesting what he says, if you keep reading in that verse then, he said, but all of these proved to be meaningless. It was just more empty miles. And these words, tested and proved here, are super important to us to understand what's going on in this book. In my life, I grew up in church and all of this, and I always, Ecclesiastes always the book of, Solomon, how he did it all wrong. And I always had it in my mind that Solomon just kind of took all this wisdom that God gave him and just kind of chucked it out the window and said, I'm just going to go live it up. I'm going to have a good time. And it was like the Old Testament version of the prodigal son. Like, hey, all right, let's just party on, guys. But that's not what it says. It says those things prove to be meaningless after he says what? I am going to test this. The point here is that Solomon's not wildly running into the abyss. The point is that Solomon's looking at life and saying, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that, I'm going to test this. And he's very deliberately trying these things. He's making calculated choices. And he does so over his entire lifetime. So it's not just like this one wild fling. It's like this is how he's decided to live his life. He's made these choices along the way, and he gets to the end of those choices and he says, you know what? It wasn't worth the effort. And that's what he's saying here in this chapter to us is like, hey, if you're trying to figure out how to be happy, let me tell you what I tried, and I tried this very deliberately and very intentionally, and it just didn't work. So save yourself the trouble. So he gives us a list here. So let's look at what's on his list as we read along here. He said, laughter, verse number 2, I said is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? And he starts to list all of these pleasure or happiness subpoints, all of these streets maybe in the city of happiness. He says this, first of all, laughter and good times. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try having fun or amusements or entertainment. Maybe it was the parties. Maybe it was the comedy clubs. Maybe he was watching the Nate Bargatze special on TV. I don't know what it was. But he was yucking it up. Like, hey, let's have a good time here. And we could take anything in the amusement world, the entertainment world, the sports world, whatever else like that, and we can enjoy those things. And Solomon did, but at the end he was like, nah, that didn't work. The laughter became madness. The comedy became tragedy. The miles were still empty. I tried cheering myself with wine, verse number 3, and embracing folly. Notice this next line. My mind still guiding me with wisdom, I wanted to see what was good for people to do under heavens during the few days of their lives. And I get this picture previously of Solomon like, I'm just going to go on on a pub crawl here and just drink it up and get how drunk I am, and maybe I can just forget about all this. That's not what this is saying. He didn't become a drunk. He became like the connoisseur of wine. I mean, you wouldn't find him in the bar. You'd probably find him in the basement, like checking all the labels on all of his vintage wines. And this is what he's saying is, I tried these things, but that didn't work either. Verse number 3, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees, built this whole irrigation system. Great projects and great pursuits. And this was, he didn't just set out and do this on a Friday night. This is what he invested his life in. And it gets to the end, he's like, I don't think about that. I don't think that one worked either. And you can just see how he could, just kind of squeezing out those creative juices in him, and it's like, oh, this is incredible. And maybe there was a moment where that was enjoyable, and he looks at what he's got done, and he can enjoy that luxury there too, but he's still like, that's not it. So he tried something else. Verse number 7, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I found people who would wait on me, who would pamper me, who would treat me as a deity, and I could have importance, and I could have power, and I could just snap my fingers, and everybody would come running. And yeah, it was just as awful as that sounds, and he didn't find fulfillment there either. So he said this, let's try something else. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And so he collected these animals, and maybe they were just, for him to feel powerful and wealthy. Maybe that was what became part of his, diet. But he was trying to have these possessions, and he was collecting things. And he kept bringing things to himself. And it says in verse number 8, I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. And so he adds money and luxury to the list. And it's still not working. It's still empty miles. And so he said this, well, I acquired male and female singers. I turned to the arts. I turned to music. And I didn't go to the concert. I had the concert come to me. Who needs a theater when you can just hire all the actors and they can come in and do this? And then he goes on, he says, and I had a harem as well, the delights of man's heart. And you could say romance, or you could say it for what it was. It was romance and sex, and it was just like, he was going to do it all. And he was doing this very intentionally because he was going to test it, and he was going to prove it. And he comes to verse number 9, he says, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me all. And all of this wisdom stayed with me. I wasn't doing this just crazily. I was very intentionally doing this. Whatever pleasures were out there, I experienced them. And I didn't experience them just crudely. I experienced them with intention and sophistication. Verse number 10, I denied myself nothing that my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor. And this was the reward for all my toil. And he's starting there to gain some wisdom on what's just happened. But before he reflects on what he just said, he seems to move on here and he says, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and all that I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Just empty miles. And let me save you the trouble, folks. It's just not worth it. Now, how did he get to that place? And he's starting to kind of come around and say, oh, I wasted a lot of time and a lot of life and a lot of energy and a lot of effort there. What is it that starts to steer him in the right direction? Well, we start going there in verse number 12. Then I turned to my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What can I learn from this? What more can the king's successor do than what's already been done? Nobody coming after me is going to be able to do more than I've done. I did see this. I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. I mean, the wise have eyes in their head. They kind of see where they're going. The fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Boom. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. We're both going to die. So what do I gain by being wise? This too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. Not only will they die, will be forgotten. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. And he is saying and he is asking in his verses like, I just did all this, and I get to the end, I'm like, well, what is the point here? Because I'm just going to die. And not only am I going to die, all of my list of accomplishments, nobody cares. All of these things I've built, people, maybe they use them, but they forget that I build them, and they're just going to go to dust anyhow. And I'm just going to die. I'm going to be no different from the common person. And it doesn't matter that I went more miles than anybody else. It just doesn't matter. And so death actually is the point that starts to give us wisdom in this situation. It's the turning point, if you want to say it that way, because we are going to die. But Solomon looks at that and he's depressed by it, and yet that realization should actually encourage us in kind of a weird way. Because here's what it does, it changes our perspective. So I look at life not just in this moment, I look ahead and say, oh, I'm going to die. And so I can transfer myself or transport myself here into look back and say, okay, how do I want to die? And so I'm going to make choices in my life that bring me here to the end. So he's dying. He's like, it's going to happen here, and I'm pretty empty. And the challenge to us is like, we're all going to die. But since we know that, let's make sure that everything that comes before it isn't empty and meaningless or empty miles. And death is the thing that finally brings some clarity here to Solomon, because he couldn't control the outcome for the first time in his life. Author David Gibson has a great book on Ecclesiastes called Living Life Backwards. But he said this: Solomon spent a lifetime striving, but not a lifetime living. And I want you to hold that thought, but Solomon still has more to say, and it gets even scarier as we read verse number 17. He says, so I hated life, because all the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me. It was all meaningless, chasing after the wind, empty miles. I hated all the things I toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. But what a statement. I hated life. In the middle of it all, when he was living it up, he's like, this really stinks. I hate it. And where you would think, like you would be excited to get up in the morning when you have all the resources available to him, it's like he dreaded it. It's like, oh, how do I get out of this? Why do I have to keep doing this? Why do I have to keep logging empty miles? And we sit here and we think, if you want to tap out, Solomon, I'm in. I'd love to have your money. I'd love to have your pussy, whatever like that. And he's like saying, no, you don't want it. Because if you get it, you're likely to hate life like I did. But then he pauses, and he makes some interesting observations, and he points out some truth that's helpful to us. In a way, it's like he's saying, let me save you a trip down a dead-end road here. In verse number 24, we jump ahead. But he says this, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This, too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases God, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, and he's talking about that last phrase here. But for the first time, Solomon, instead of looking at everything below the sun in the horizontal, he mentions God, and he looks up. See, because of all this list that we have up here, what's missing? God. He doesn't show up there. And finally, as Solomon gets to the end of his life, he turns back to what he already knew and said, God, should have thought of that. And so he tells us that if we're going to make sense of life, he tells us if we're going to avoid what he's just gone through there, then God is going to have to be part of the picture. And he tells us some very important things in these verses and even through this whole chapter. So let's look at these. Let's look at the list. Here's the lessons. First of all, God is going to be part of the answer. You will never figure out life by simply talking to yourself or to your friends or to your counselors. You have to include God somehow because God is the sustainer of life, but God is the creator of life. So however life is supposed to work, who designed it to work that way? Well, God did. And so we've got to include God in the picture of our life because he made us for some purpose, and we're never going to discover that purpose outside of God himself. So God's got to be part of the answer. Secondly, life will be better for the person who acknowledges God and who lives by his instruction. And this is what Solomon is saying here at the end of that verse. He's like, hey, you need to know that God is, but you need to follow what God says here. But this is great from several different reasons. First of all, it takes a lot of pressure off us. I don't have to figure it out. Oh, you said it was this way, God? Okay, I'll just trust you. I'll just do what you said here. And it might not even make sense to me, but at least I can just say, well, I'm going to trust you, God, in this situation. It's also kind of interesting, though, because this is like just a statement of fact. It's not really even a promise. Like if you acknowledge God, life will be better. It's just how it works. If God created the world, then if we live in congruency with how God created the world, it's just going to work better for us. And so this is actually true for the person who knows God. It's even true for the person who doesn't know God. If you take the Bible, you take what God says, and you put that into practice in life, your life is simply going to go better because you're following the rules of the person who created it. Now, if you know him, that's even better. Because as you go down the roads of life, he's actually steering your life too. But life will be better for the person who acknowledges God and who lives by his instruction. Thirdly, life is a gift and not a get. Life is a gift and not a get. Life is what God gives to us. It's not what we get for ourselves. It's not what we gain at the end of all our efforts and labor. And the idea here is to step back and relax and say, okay, wait a minute. I can enjoy this life? Yeah. When God created man and put him in a garden, he didn't put him there to be miserable. He put him there so they could enjoy the works of creation. He spent days creating this world and says, here, now go live and enjoy it. is sometimes we're like, you know what, I just got to get more, I just got to get more, I just got to get more, and we spend all of our days working and striving and putting in the long hours and wearing ourselves out. And God's saying, and Solomon's saying here too, say, like, whoa, time out. Life's a gift. Enjoy what God has given you. Fourthly, life is about the ordinary more than what we realize. He starts that verse, verse number 24. A person can do nothing more than eat and drink. And what is his point? It's like, hey, what do you do every day? You eat, you drink, you go about your life. The sun comes up every morning. You hang out with friends. Maybe you go on a walk in nature. Those ordinary things in life are part of the gift. And the crazy thing, we went through that whole list there before. Everything on that list had the possibility of being life-giving. And yet for him, it was life-sucking. But he couldn't enjoy the ordinary in those things. He was always trying to take it to the next step, to the next extreme, so they could experience that. But there's more lessons just in this whole passage that we read. Fifth one here, we're all going to die. And we need to be reminded of the fact that we have limitations in life, starting with death. And we need to be reminded of the fact that nothing that we have or nothing that we accomplish actually goes with us. I have a friend who was a chaplain at a hospital, and in that role, he got to do a lot of funerals. And he told me about something he did, and I thought, this is kind of cool. He would tell the family, he said, hey, when I do this funeral, I want you to bring in 4 or 5 objects that kind of like represented this person's life. And so people might bring in like a military medal, or they might bring in a golf trophy, or they might bring in like the desk plate from where he worked, or they might bring in a sweatshirt from where he went to college, or maybe a photo album from a family trip, or maybe there was like ticket stubs from some. And they would bring these in, and he'd set them on like the podium or the table in front of him, and he would use those to talk about this person's life. And that's kind of a cool idea, because I can see the visual there. But think about this. All of those things were sitting on a table. They didn't go with them. And all of these things that we get so worked up in life, they're not going with us. And so we need to be reminded, because we're going to die, that we need to be careful then about how we live, so that we don't get to the end like Solomon did and go, that was dumb. And so death actually gives us perspective, because death pushes us towards wisdom, which is what? Wisdom is always looking to the end and seeing, how do you get there? 6, there is life both above the sun and beyond the sun. Solomon lived all of his life about what's going here on earth, and at the end he finds says, oh, wait a minute, there's something more above the sun, but there's also something beyond the sun, because the sun's not even going to last forever. But God's kingdom will last forever. And we can encourage ourselves with that idea that there is something more past this life. And then finally, Solomon teaches us this: the view from the top tells us the world is upside down. And Solomon's all the way at the end of his life, and he's on top of everything, and he looks down and he says, oh, wait a minute. I'm just on the same level here with the commoner, because we're all going to die the same way. And everything I thought would take me up here, it's actually just upside down. And I haven't really got anywhere in life. And so Solomon looks back and he says, here's some lessons. Take a different road. Here's the life that you should live instead. First of all, life is to be enjoyed. It's a gift to be enjoyed, not a game to be won. It's not a puzzle to be solved. It's not a challenge to be mastered. And some of us are trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to break the code here. And Solomon's saying is, don't even try. You're missing the point. The point isn't for you to figure it all out. That's God's job. Your responsibility and your opportunity is to actually enjoy it as you go. Now, we have this natural inclination that we want to fix things, and he's like, step back from that. And just actually take things as they come. And use things in the proper way. You think about Solomon's relationships in life. He used people for what he could get out of them. And what's the counsel here is like, you know what? How about if you just enjoy people for who they are? Instead of what they can give you, what you can actually enjoy by knowing them in those relationships. And you can take that from any of that list. All of those things are gifts to be enjoyed, not something to be conquered. Secondly, live in the moment. Don't just live for the moment. And Solomon spent a lot of his life working so that he could get to the point and he could stop and he could enjoy it for a moment. And then it was past, and then he'd work, and he could enjoy it for the moment. And okay, I'm going to build this building, and look at how impressive this building is. Okay, now I need to build another building. And he was constantly moving on, but he was trying to create moments, and God's wisdom is like, you have moments. You have moments when the dog does something funny and it makes you laugh. Or you have those moments when you're talking to your wife and there's just something that like you really connect on this heart level. Or there are moments when like you just have this burst of inspiration in a project. Like enjoy those moments. So live in the moment. And what we end up doing is we're so busy pursuing all this other stuff on the list that we miss all the good that God's bringing in our lives along the way. And we turn our lives into a to-do list when I think it would be fine if it was more like a scrapbook. And we wear ourselves out trying to experience something that we could kind of experience the exact same thing without all the crazy effort. See, the journey is the reward. The destination is not the reward. There's no roads that lead to happiness. Thirdly, realize that enough is a choice and it's not a line. If you are not satisfied with what you have, you're probably not going to be satisfied with more. In fact, some people have enough and they're satisfied. Other people have the exact same amount and they don't have that satisfaction because they see that they have to get to some line somewhere. When I can just finally get up to there, then I will have enough. Then I will be satisfied. Then I will be, and here's the word, content. One of the great secrets of life is contentment. Solomon didn't need all of those things to enjoy life. He thought he did, and then he got them and said, well, that didn't work. But we have all the gifts that God gives us so that we can enjoy them and we can be content in those things. My daughter Lindsay studied abroad in Africa for a semester in Uganda. But I remember when she came back home, she was like, Dad, those people have nothing. And they're so happy. Because they have somewhere discovered that having things doesn't make them happier. And we need to realize that enough, we get to pick where that is. And we can pick what we have right now and say, okay, that's enough. And we don't have to be burdened by having more. And we don't have to be anxious about, how are we going to get there? Is it going to be enough? Fourthly, learn how to enjoy the things of life without worshiping them. The problem with all these things on the list, and this is the problem for Solomon, is he started looking to them for fulfillment instead of to God. So they became his God. The happiness, the having fun, the party life, the fine wines, the building things, those became what he looked to for fulfillment instead of God. And so he worshiped those, and he gave those things value that were greater than God's value in life. And so that's the challenge to us, though, is that we put things in our lives that we think are going to give us satisfaction and joy and contentment and all these different things, and it's all under the sun. And it's all empty miles because it leaves God out of the picture. So we can enjoy those things. There's nothing wrong with them. Actually, they're gifts, right? God gives us these things so that we can enjoy, not so that we can worship them, but so that we can worship him. We can look at this good and say, wow, look at what I have here. What a good God who gives them to me. And the good things in life should point us to the goodness of God. And lastly, while we can't and don't have to figure life out, we can, and hear me on that, we don't have to figure life out. And we can't. Because God created it and God's got a bigger picture than we get our heads around. While we can't figure life out, we can and should learn what we can do about making life better. Because life matters. Your life matters. It matters to God. He created you for this life that you're living. And so the challenge to us isn't like, okay, how do I don't really get the whole thing. You don't have to get the whole thing. You can get this much of it. God created you. God loves you. God's given you good things in your life. He wants you to actually enjoy this life in the right way. Not by just being crazy and going out and doing all these wild things, but by taking this good that you have and saying, that's a gift. Enjoying it in moderation, I guess you could say. And so Solomon, and I guess we should say this too, we need to add faith to it though, right? That's the greatest gift, where God comes to us and says, let me give you faith. You want life to be better? Include God. You want life to be better? Do what God says. You want life to be better? Get above the under the sun to above the sun. So Solomon here, he adds some layers to this question. What is life all about? He goes to his death to answer that question. He looks at that square in the eye, and he's just, I don't know, days, weeks, years from that, and he looks back and goes, I could have done that a whole lot different. And he looks back and he says to us, you can do this a whole lot different. Because you might be thinking, I need to have the fame or the popularity or the wisdom or the riches or the relationships or the resources that Solomon had. And if I had those things, I'd be fine. And Solomon's like, no. You can actually have those things and be so much less than fine. Just go back here and find these simple gifts of life, the simple enjoyments of life that God gives you, and be content with those things. Don't make the same mistake I did, Solomon says. Don't go and chase and pursue and covet and strive and just work. That's not living. Living is realizing that life is a gift. Living is realizing that it's a gift that's given to us by God, and realizing that actually we can enjoy it within the boundaries that God gives us. So we go back to the journal here of Q, and we read this, day 12 now. It's been quite a week, but now I find myself exhausted and more discouraged than ever. For a while it worked. The buzz drowned out the emptiness. The lights distracted me from the darkness. Yet every road seemed to circle back on itself, and I'd end up right back where I'd started. But sometime after midnight, when the crowds thinned and the noises fade, it hit me again. Same feeling, same ache. Even surrounded by people, I felt alone. Even with all the motion, I was still standing still. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's not about where I go or what I chase or who I'm with. Maybe I need to stop long enough to ask what all this motion is really for. Because if the lights can't fill the emptiness, what will? Tomorrow, I drive again. Maybe somewhere quieter this time. Maybe somewhere I can start to listen. Q. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your word that speaks to us. I thank you for the words of Solomon that challenge us, that remind us that you are the creator of life, that we don't have to figure it all out, that we can just simply live into the life you've given to us, the good things that you've provided for us that we can enjoy. And I pray, God, that you would help us even as we approach this next week to let go of some of those things that we are so tightly connected to, that we think are going to be the enough for us. And help us to be content with you and the life you offer. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. I have 2 questions for you this morning. The first one is this. It's to the person who has accepted Christ. You're a follower of Jesus. You're on this road with him. Have you gotten sidetracked? Have you taken a side road, chasing something down that you thought was going to give you some happiness, some pleasure, some fun? Maybe it's time to say, you know what, I've made that way more of a priority or an idol, or it's taken way more of my life than what it's worth. Maybe you need to make a change, a decision, a choice. Maybe you need to think about this whole idea of enough. What's that all about? And maybe you need to ask God to give you more contentment in your life. I don't know what the Spirit said to you, but will you respond? Or maybe you've come this morning and God isn't even part of your life. What Solomon says is that if you'll make him part of your life, it will make your life better. It won't make your life necessarily easier or less complicated, but it will make it better because you'll never go through life alone. And so Jesus comes, God comes, and it gives you the invitation for forgiveness, for freedom, for life forever. And you can have that, you can experience that by making the choice right where you sit today and expressing this to God in prayer. That Jesus, I choose you, your death on the cross, so that I could have life. Please forgive me, come into my story. And he'll do that. And so, God, I am grateful for life. I'm grateful for the small joys of life. I'm grateful for these people that I get to do life with and the joy that they bring me and the encouragement that they bring me and all the good things that are part of my life. Don't let me miss them, God, because I'm looking for something that's no better than what I have. Give us wisdom, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you stand with me?